to go back to the memories, I don't know if you're familiar with the game The Whispering Vault.
You mentioned it in a previous thing, and I looked through it a little bit, yeah, or looked into it a little bit.
Yeah, I actually think that the game, if the scope of my attention isn't fooling me, I think the game is probably underrated.
Mm.
That it's kind of funny. You know how much I reference Legendary Lives in all of these conversations and seminars and stuff? I mean,
Mm.
I seem to be obsessed with Legendary Lives as I look back over the Adept Play site. This is
Right,
weird. I like the game very much. I've played it a few times, but I'm not like a dedicated student of Legendary Lives.
right.
Given the 90s and what I was playing and the work that went into it and the influence on Sorcerer and the bridge between champions and Sorcerer, the Whispering Vault would be the game that I would actually reference as a primary play and thought bank for me
Mm.
historically. So
Right,
by all rights, I should have been referencing it constantly through all of this last year of Adept Play.
right.
So maybe I'll do that going forward a little bit more. But it's perfect for what you're talking about here. In uh, in with the Whispering Vault, you are talking about characters who have died and have reasonably accurate memories of their lives, if not in entire detail. They have become very metaphysical beings now. They are guardians, they are of reality, they are basically badass superheroes, badass
Right.
mystic superheroes, real hardcore. Um, and they, um, well, what they do have though are things called keys of humanity, and each key is stated in an abstract way, usually an emotion. And the one that all of them are recommended to have is compassion, in a way
Mm.
to which helps you, helps you not forget that you're, playing somebody you're supposed to like.
Right.
Um, but the keys of humanity are all stated in that kind of named in that abstract way. But on the other hand, they also have a bit of a backstory,
Mm.
and those backstories are um, fairly fairly strong anchors of your character's personality and
Mm.
priorities. So I finally found the page. A common combination is two virtuous keys, two flawed keys, and a key memory. But technically, they could all be memories. And even more so, all of them have some physical manifestation that the stalker walks
Mm.
around with.
Right.
Um, so, like, say you were they don't even have to be literal keys, but they often are key like, just because.
Mm.
A good example of a stalker from a future science fiction future. The example given is that you know he wears a jumpsuit um, and has 5 security cards pins to it, or
Right.
something like that. But or your classic thing is everyone likes to make a stalker from medieval Europe sooner or later, and those characters inevitably have a ring of rusty iron keys. Um,
Nice.
but they're often they could be tattoos, they could be all sorts of things. Now the interesting thing about the keys and how they're used, I'm not finding the precise mechanic, but they do um, play a role in a number of the different rituals. You show your key, and it makes a big difference to what's going on. And I know
Mm.
that there's some way in which they can be used in a bonusy way. But what's kind of interesting is that completely at the player's option, not mandatory in any fashion, um, the player may choose to abandon the key. And to do that, they have to spend their karma experience points just as if they would for buying a new skill or something, or improving an attribute. But instead, you actually lose a key, and you get a blanket bonus to everything you do with awareness and insight, but you also drop a die in your fleshly robustness. And it costs more karma for each key bought off. So it's actually fairly, you're giving up a whole lot of in-game bonus, because you can burn karma for in-game bonuses as well as buying things in point buy improvement. And so you're basically losing a ton of the currency of the game. There's a whole different path to take with your karma. And it costs a hell of a lot. And even if you are allowed to reclaim a key that you've lost, which doesn't cost you anything, but if you want to get rid of it, you don't get the points back. And if you want to get rid of it, you have to spend the points all over again. And then when the 5 keys are gone, when and if, maybe you just don't like one of the keys and you just want to buy it off, right? And you just stay at 4-key guy for the rest of the time, and that's fine. Or if you do go that full route, and in the fullness of a considerable amount of play, are clearly becoming more and more evanescent and more transcendent, and less your physical side. If you do that, the character finishes play. It's one of the games that does that. But it's point-wise and time-wise, it's probably the least likely thing to happen. But it is an option. Notice some of the differences. One, it's utterly to do with a player-driven thing. Notice as well in Cold Soldier that the player makes up the memories. And then finally, the main thing about it too that I want to point out is, again, it's not really exactly a built-in piece of the system. Like karma is totally a built-in piece of resolution, in a way that I'm sure you're familiar with. You spend some karma and you'll get your bonus. Or you spend some karma and you build up a piece of your character sheet. So the more you spend on bonuses, the less you have to spend on your character sheet, and vice versa. And that's real common. It goes all the way back to Marvel superheroes, and could well be somewhere before, although I don't remember anything before that. But people did it at the table anyway with any game all the time. In games that were supposed to be for experience and building yourself up, people started blowing them as bonuses, to the point where lots of people think that's a rule in games where it's not.
Interesting.
Okay, so anyway, so Whispering Vault karma is very much a well-known mechanic handled in a well-known way, but the keys are not. And if somebody, and I'm thinking of somebody who I used to tout this game to all the time and never really quite got his claws into it, even though he tried it. And he shook his head and he said, why would a player ever do that? And it seems to me that unless your system gets that question from somebody, then maybe you're being a little too hard with your memories, a little too rock solid, locked in, understandable with your mechanics for the memories. In other words, the solidity of the reward currency and effectiveness currency that for such a mechanic, maybe it's better off to being a little more ephemeral. Like it is in Cold Soldier and in the Whispering Vault in very different ways. And I bring up the Whispering Vault because it's the one of the games that I'm thinking about. It's the one in which you are whittling away at it, conceivably, rather than building up more of it like you do in Cold Soldier. Now in Le Mont Marie, the memory is such a teeny tiny scrap and is also easily blown away by events. So Therefore, or rather, you would burn a memory rather than let your character die the final death.
Mm.
If that's, I mean, it's a bit of a soak for dying out of the game.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you're considerably diminished and have less to work with to make yourself into, a motivated character. So is that making any sense about kind of the different takes that those three games have, but they all shed light on the role of these things in play?
Yeah, I definitely think that it needs to be softer and it needs to be less, less bonusy. I'm very interested in Whispering Vault and how they handled it. I feel like with this, I wanted to be a bit more about loss, but then more so than like choosing to buy a thing off. But I still feel like player agency is important in that loss. Like, it shouldn't feel like
I completely agree. The player agency in Whispering Vault in this case is total. I never did this, but one of the things that I had contemplated in a particularly fantasy horror application of Sorcerer, and this was going to be one of those versions of Sorcerer in which recovery from zero humanity loss was actually possible. There's already a mechanic in the game that temporarily removes humanity, and it will come back even if it takes you to zero. And that's called Taint. And so, anyway, that mechanic's already in there. And then there are other things that I talk about in one of the supplements, The Sorcerer's Soul, about dealing with humanity zero as an actual functioning part of a play rather than just the exit sign. And in that, I remember thinking about it and saying, no, I'm getting distracted and creating subsystems. I'll just do it on my own for a game, for a session of Sorcerer sometime. The idea was that I would have tables, or even, and this was a long time ago, and the idea, and it goes back to the cut up technique in Over the Edge that has inspired a lot of us here and there in game design, where you write a bunch of shit on a little piece of paper and tear it all up and throw it in the bag. Use them. Emily Care-Boss uses it a lot in her game Sign In Stranger, and you can find it. There was a game called Bedlam. Matt Matchell, I think. No, that's not right. That's the Stickman guy. Anyway. Bedlam was a game where you have a whole bunch of coots in the asylum. Telling stories on each other, a bit of a Baron Munchausen kind of thing, and but you had to use drawn pieces of paper and mess with them, for that. Anyways, this was along those lines, but the point was that again, you were drawing stuff, and it would all be horrific, all sorts of gross shit was what I had in mind, sort of Raphael Chandler type awfulness, and you were like, and suddenly, when you drew, you remembered your character doing it. Well, is that a good thing? Is that too, I don't know, kind of one of those improv challenges, here, be a baby elephant, go.
Right.
And I don't really hold with that in games that I design. I'm not saying it's a bad part of role-playing design, but it does have kind of that, pitch it, see if you can catch it quality. And that seems to me, more than the offensive,ness, that seems to me to be the danger of the technique you were talking about, where the GM comes up with scraps. So really, I know you were talking about, well, what if they're inappropriate or whatever? Is that really the danger? Or is it just I think the bigger danger is that it's simply being tossed something that you have to assimilate and make work?
Yeah, I know that when I was young, I think that part of the reason why it's a worry for me, aside from my SJW tendencies, is that I know that I tried to run some horror in my youth where I was just like, well, it's not landing, they're not scared, let me just go for the most grotesque.
That's right. Yeah. And there, though, isn't that just sort of, again, kind of crisscrossing two variables? One is how much people are like just grossed out and disgusted by you. And then the other one is whether whatever it is it's the process of incorporation that I'm talking about. Whether the process of incorporation is in and of itself very iffy there. Now, SJW or not, that's not anything I have the urge to criticize whatsoever. I'm thinking more in terms of what we're sitting down to do. I mean, it's always kind of interested me. As a longtime player of the White Wolf games, that there is this weird tension, but I'm not sure it's a productive tension, between we are not, wussy players. We're sitting down and we are doing the darkness. We call it frenzy for a reason. We call it the beast for a reason. We have, edgy talk in the games. We are, we are on it. We are big boys. If the movies can do it and nobody says boo, we can do it. Why are gamers somehow so fragile that we can't handle PG-13 when we roleplay, even though all of us go off and watch, edgiest possible R movies all the time. And for some reason, none of us are traumatized. So, I mean, I understand that point of view, and White Wolf was one of the first companies to pretty much say that out loud.
Right.
And so one can snark, but, in terms of the details, but that's neither here nor there. I'm saying that they were actually making a pretty valid point. So simultaneously, you have the sort of group willingness to say, this is what we do. Everybody, hey, you guys like Clive Barker? Yeah, I love Clive Barker. Okay, we're going to do some gaming now.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, there's this backpedaling about, oh no, oh no, oh no. What if, what if somebody doesn't like it? And I've always found that to be oddly contradictory. It's very difficult to find the right thing to say if what you're saying, it's very difficult to find the right way to say, and we might not like it, if what you're saying is we're going to go and be a little transgressive in the first place. So I didn't mean to spend all this time on that. I'm just saying that I thought, for what you were talking about, that it was much more an issue when it came to the process of incorporation. They say, I have to receive, and now I have to make this my own. That can be very productive, right? That back and forth of creativity. But it may or may not be well suited for this particular mechanic and content.
Yeah.
That's sort of the question. Maybe Cold Soldier has the right idea, and the player is the one who should be, saying this stuff.
Right. Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe the GM has some freedom. Maybe it's maybe it's more like the Sorcerer's Kicker. The player wrote the kicker, but once they do, now it belongs to the game master, and they can totally reverse its content on you. They can totally make it 10 times different than, bigger and more complicated, or they could stay very, very simple and straightforward with it. Who knows?
Right.
So there are times when you do have these productive backs and forths. I don't know. So it just seems like those are two issues. One is, how do we have the collaborative back and forth creative incorporation? And the other one is comfort, or better yet, tolerance, and the inspiring or challenging, or, oh my God, I can't believe you said that, but I'm going with it, kind of content. Those are just two different things. That's really my only point.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing to consider, because I feel like if there's some, I like the idea of in some way perverting the memories that have become dramatically important to the character and player. But just like I don't want some like I don't want 18-year-old me to be like, well, you molested your daughter that you cared so much
Exactly.
about.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I'm
No, we're not.
completely. Yeah. I'm completely with you on that.
Something where it could be like the player gets input, or the player comes up with like the player gets a prompt and gets to like run with the prompt of like, okay, one of your memories is somehow turned violent. How does that happen? I don't know. Something that gives the player the ability to like veer off of without having to avoid all dark content
Right.
in a horror.
So okay. So we've talked a little bit about the memory thing. And those games I brought up mainly in that concern, but they also, you'll notice, are all games in which your character is, deceased and in some kind of halfway existence, not just in metaphysical nature, but also in where they traverse. And you'll have to take my word for that. But the characters in all the games I'm talking about aren't in the ordinary world, at least from their own perspective, even if they do walk in it sometimes.